Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy 24/7 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy 24/7 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy 24/7 podcast.
Welcome back to Vandy 24/7 Live. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Brandon Bigsby. In the battles of Bridgestone Arena, Vanderbilt is a one and done at the SEC tournament, falls to Texas, trailed by as much as 20 in this game, Brandon. Just a showing that wasn't good enough in a lot of ways. Vanderbilt storms back late, but you just generally feel like this was a game that Vanderbilt had to have ease its mind a little bit. You feel like it's still probably in. I don't think we're overreacting saying they're not going to the tournament or anything along those lines. I think they're still in. It might send them to Dayton if everything goes wrong. If everything goes to crap, maybe you could think about them not being in. But a lot of worry in that locker room. I was in there and talked to Jason Edwards, Dalen Carey, Chris Magnon, AJ Hoggard. Pretty much all of them except Hoggard said they are worried about the next couple of days. And with a chance to control its own destiny the rest of the way, to maybe ease its mind a little bit, Vanderbilt falls to Texas in a game where it just comes out and gets completely blitzed, couldn't make a shot from beyond the arc. Brandon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you said, Joey, I personally wouldn't be panicking too much about Vanderbilt in terms of the tournament. Now, these next 3 or 4 nights going to not be as easy to sleep for this team, obviously. If they win the night, then you pretty much assume Vanderbilt is a lock. You feel a little bit more comfortable about them being in, but I think that this is a situation where Vanderbilt's very grateful that it is a rather weak bubble this year. And there's only so many bid stealers out there, I feel like, that could potentially knock some teams out. Vanderbilt has not been near the bubble and really any of the bracketologies. Now, obviously, none of these people are in the committee room, but still, I think a lot of those are pretty, on par with what we would like arguably see on Selection Sunday. So in terms of tournament hopes, I don't think there's too much to worry about, but again, at the same time, 3 straight losses, you won't be playing your best basketball this time of year. And all of those losses to teams that are right on the bubble or like Texas outside the cut line. And the Texas team that, Joey, they came into today losing 7 of their last 10 games. This was not a Texas team that was like Vanderbilt a couple of years ago trying to play their way in because they got hot late. This is a Texas team that had to win today and really was kind of struggling. So personally, I wouldn't be too worried about Vanderbilt necessarily making it into the field, but I think you're starting to see the pressures of March. Mark Byington talked about it a little bit after the game. Kind of get into this team just a little bit. Once they felt they were maybe a little bit comfortable, they played 3 desperate teams and if needed wins. The performances have been probably the 3 worst consecutive performances we've seen in the Vanderbilt all season.
Yeah, and I think that's my bigger area of worry than what happens with the bubble or what happens on Selection Sunday. It's that, man, 3 of their worst performances of the year came back to back to back. And that's not a super high bar. They haven't had a ton of terrible performances. I thought the first half today was probably their second worst half of the year behind the second half at Oklahoma. But that's a worry, right? You go into NCAA tournament and you're playing arguably the worst basketball while other teams are peaking. You saw Arkansas earlier. They've won 5 of 6. Feels like they're peaking, even though today obviously not the best showing that they've ever had, but usually that's the worry, right? It's like AJ Hoggard has really only had 1 good game in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Jason Edwards is shooting like 21% from 3 over the last couple of weeks. You're worried a little bit. They've been out of character a little bit too much offensively. And I wrote it. It feels like there's a little bit of a spell over this team at times where Jason Edwards is turning it over. He's going to the basket a little bit out of control. Devin McLaughlin's fouling and got 94 feet from the basket. They're missing open threes. They missed, their first 7 or 8 of the game. They shot 3 for 19 on the day. Those are things that this Vanderbilt team doesn't do. And I think that's where your big worry is. It's like, well, you're starting to see some of the cracks here late in the year when they should be flowing. The offense should be as good as it has been all year. The ball should be popping. it's really not at this point. And Mark Byington has said they've been out of character. He said today they pressed a little bit. I think he might have said they were out of character. I can't fully remember.
He said that 2 or 3 times over the last few games, it feels like.
Right. So I think that's your bigger concerning trend rather than are they in, are they not in. I think their resume speaks for itself. But the level of play over the last few weeks, just don't think it's necessarily good enough to feel comfortable that they're going to show what they are in the NCAA tournament. It's really interesting to think, like, man, we might not see that Vanderbilt team that beat Missouri again. We might see the team that showed up today, the team that showed up in Athens. And I think that's the bigger worry than maybe whether they're going to have 5 bid stealers and they're going to have to sweat out Selection Sunday. I think they're sweating a little bit now, but I think everything would have to go wrong for them to not get in. Not everything has to go wrong for them to lose their first-round game, though. They'll probably be the lower seed, and I think that's I guess I rambled on a little bit, but I think that's where you're looking at it saying, man, I don't know what's going to happen next Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, no rambling at all. I think those are all really good points. And I think that's something for Vanderbilt. And I know no fan wants to hear this. The team probably won't want to hear this either. But something that Mark Byington has kind of said, we haven't really talked about this much, but said it a couple of times during the presser just now. I think now you kind of can't emphasize on it. Vanderbilt is really banged up. I think you're seeing some tired legs kind of start to infiltrate a little bit. That might have something to do with a lot of the shots we're seeing. I mean, Vanderbilt was 3 of 19 from 3. They shot 41% from the field. That was only 3% lower than what Texas shot. And they led by double digits for pretty much the entirety of this game. It feels like, in a weird way, maybe this break could be a blessing in disguise for Vanderbilt a little bit. I mean, not even just from a physical standpoint, but I think even just from a mental standpoint. You're playing in an SEC that is as stacked as it's ever been. You're playing nothing but teams, unless it's against LSU or South Carolina, that are either playing their tournament lives or are soundly in the tournament and are seen as contenders. I think maybe for Vanderbilt, we don't know, obviously, for sure what their fate's going to be. I think both of us are confident they'll be in. I think most people on the outside that are in the know feel confident that Vanderbilt will be in. But it feels like Vanderbilt almost needs to just take a break, exhale, get healthy physically, and also just find themselves a bit mentally again. I mean, Tyler Nickel talked about yesterday how it felt like Vanderbilt needed to play more desperate again, needed to play with that edge that maybe it hadn't in those first 2 games because they weren't with that same, we have to win to get in. It feels like Vanderbilt's pressing a little bit too much now. Like they feel that pressure, and not even just with the bubble and the outside noise, just the pressure on themselves to win because they are a competitive group. They want to win these games so badly. And that's something that's so tough to manage this time of year because that next loss ends your season, everything that you've worked for. So it almost feels like even though you don't want to take the loss, you want to see this team trending in the right direction, playing really good basketball. And I don't think this would be in the same conversation if the first 2 games before this one last week didn't go the way they did. But I understand some of the panic, but on the optimism side of things, this week break could maybe be a blessing in disguise for Vanderbilt because it feels like they're just pressing a little bit right now. They are out of character. And you rediscover that character quickly because, again, that next loss ends your season, no matter whether it's in the NCAA tournament or the NIT or wherever. Vanderbilt has to find themselves again. That, to me, I think is the biggest story coming out of the thing.
Yeah, and along the lines of health, I talked to Grant Huffman in the locker room. He said the goal is for him to be back by NCAA tournament play. I think they feel like he's close. We saw him in practice yesterday. He was going through a lot of things. I think he was still a little bit limited in terms of the activities he was doing, but also in terms of kind of the way he's feeling, limping around, like we mentioned. But that's the one to really watch. Jason Edwards also has a pretty noticeable scratched up eye. He's got a big red spark on his eye. So I think those are the 2 to watch. MJ Collins a little bit banged up. Those are the things that the week off can maybe help them with a little bit. I think they just got to get in character, though. That's the bigger thing. If that's bigger than health, they have to find themselves again. They have to find that swagger again. I feel like you haven't seen the team that beat Missouri in a while. I feel like that group is just – it's a distant memory at this point, even though it was only 2 weeks ago. And they've got to figure some things out. They've got to figure out what do they want the rest of the season to look like. And I think they are about the right things mentally. Time to do it, though, because they haven't done it the last 3 games. They got to 20 wins, and you're thinking, man, maybe they could really keep this rolling. But, Brandon, right now, I think you're kind of a crossroads. Is this going to end the next game? Is everyone going to go home crying after the NCAA tournament game? Or could they make a little run here and make a little push and really put an exclamation point on this season? I think that's the story here. Do they limp to the finish line like they have been the last couple of games, or do they find a way to turn this around? They're certainly going to have some time to do it, but the choice is theirs now.
Yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt controls its own destiny from this point forward. Obviously, it can't really control what happens in terms of Selection Sunday. Again, I don't feel much panic. I know there's some people who are like, man, you lost 3 of your last games, recency bias. You have to remember, the SEC tournament, really a lot of these conference tournaments, they only mean so much. They mean the most for the automatic bids. In terms of bubble talk, we've seen in the past the committee has set that precedent to where they don't really put a ton of value in these games. You can go back to Vanderbilt 2 years ago. Vanderbilt was playing their best basketball all season. They had won 3 or 4 games coming into the tournament, won 2 or 3 games in Bridgestone Arena, and they weren't even in the first 4 out. Didn't make the tournament, or a 2 seed in the NIT. And if you were to go off of that same logic, this team would be in this year because there's not that same value with the SEC tournament and some of that recency bias. It's about that overall body of work. 20-12, a ton of quad 1 wins. This was still a quad 1 loss as well, so they haven't taken any bad losses. The one non-quad 1 loss they took was against a Drake team that is in the NCAA tournament, conference champions, won 29 games. I don't think that the tournament and the bubble talk really is the concern for this Vanderbilt team. To me, it's, can Vanderbilt find themselves again? Can we see that team from the Texas A&M game and the Missouri game a couple weeks ago? Even in some of those losses, I mean, Vanderbilt played well at Tennessee, blew the lead, obviously. They played really well in that game. It's just, it feels like that team and the team we've seen the last 3 games are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Can Vanderbilt get back to that? And what is it going to take for them to get back to that? It's up to them to find those answers. They're going to have to find them soon because, once again, that next loss ends your season. So it's going to be interesting to see what this team looks like the next time we find them and really how they respond to this, because there is a lot of those tired legs. There is some of that banged up, but just the execution has not been there in these last 3 games as well. I think that, to me, is the scariest thing about what we see.
For sure. And I like the point you make about the 22-23 team, because they come here, they have probably the best stretch of basketball that they had that whole year, and it didn't matter. And I don't think that this necessarily doesn't matter, but I do think that you look at that precedent and you say, well, people freaked out about what they did that week in a good way, and they still didn't get in. They weren't really even close. This year, people are freaking out about what they didn't do, and you would think it probably doesn't matter all that much either. It certainly would have helped if they won. It would have put an exclamation point on their resume and everything that they had done. But I also look at it and say it's not that big of a deal that they lost today. It's still a quad 1 loss, everything along those lines. And we'll swing it to Billy Derrick in a second, but I don't think either of us are panicking about what today does in specific. I think it's a sour ending, and Vanderbilt's got to find its best basketball again. It hasn't had it in a few weeks, but Billy, we'll swing it to you. It doesn't feel like this is the end-all be-all for its season.
There we go. Got to unmute
There
myself.
you go. I didn't know if my volume was too low or what was going on here.
No, you're good. And hopefully you guys can hear me here as we close it out. No, I heard a lot of what you guys were talking about. And first, with this game, number one, Texas is very talented. We forget about that. They didn't have Tremont Mark in the last matchup between these two teams. Tremont Mark was tremendous tonight, 19 points, and Vandy didn't have anybody that could guard him. And Texas also looked like the more energized team. They looked like the more physical team. They looked desperate. They looked like they absolutely had to have it. Same thing against Arkansas, right? Same thing against Georgia. The last 3 games have really all told the same story. And Vanderbilt hasn't responded in the last 3 matchups, like you talked about, Brandon. But one of you guys hit on, they're banged up, right? I mean, Chris Magnon he laid it out there today. And who knows how many injuries certain guys have, but they've been fighting through them. We didn't see Grant Huffman today. Who knows if MJ Collins was even 100% today. You've got Edwards getting banged up. You've got other guys, Magnon, banged up. So it feels like they're leaking a little bit, right? That they're leaking a little bit of oil here down the stretch. And I think, if anything, this next week will benefit them. I mean, it can't hurt this team, right? You have basically a week off until the NCAA tournament. And how does this hurt you right now? We haven't seen, like you said, Joey, we haven't seen this team play the way they played against Missouri since that game. And that is concerning, right? That is a concern for fans, and fans can be concerned. But the other thing is that you shouldn't move the goalposts either. And fans do that a lot, right? But at the end of the day, um, look, I don't think either of us expected Vanderbilt to make the tournament, right? I don't think there were many people that expected Vanderbilt to make the tournament. It's more of an outside, uh, expectation potentially, but they're getting in, right? They're getting in, but it's going to be stressful, right? You put out in your column, Joey, it's going to be a stressful next few days. But at the end of the day, guys, they're there. They're in the conversation, and I think you're going to see tonight in a lot of these games, the desperate teams will likely win out, right? Now we know Arkansas. Arkansas was desperate. They won. Oklahoma's going to be desperate. They need to win today. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Georgia. So the NCAA tournament is what matters. But at the end of the day, Vanderbilt's not playing well either. So you're kind of in that conundrum, guys, of, okay, is Vanderbilt able to get back to how they played against Missouri, or is this kind of the new end of season Vanderbilt? We'll see. But I don't think we know where this team is at. Right. I think the next couple of days we'll get a good sense of the seed wise. Like you said, Brandon, there's not a ton of opportunities for bid stealers. So I don't think people should be freaking out that they might not make the tournament. They could be in Dayton, right? I think they very well could be in Dayton, but they also could have a 10 seed if not, if the right things happen for them. So look, I think they're in, guys. Today was another example of Texas being very talented, Texas being desperate, and it's hard to beat a team twice, right? But also the 3-point shots, guys, they were wide open. I mean, like there were very few looks that were even contested today, and that was huge. So I think the foul trouble was a big deal, and you can talk about the refs if you want, but look, Vanderbilt was getting dominated for a lot of that game, right? So refs are not really an excuse there. But 3 of 19 from 3, I think it was. That's just not going to cut it. Edwards had some wide open looks that could have really swung the momentum there in the second half. Didn't knock him down. Same with Nickel. He had back to back in the span of like 5 seconds there that just didn't fall. So, guys, I thought y'all hit on the overall picture well. But Texas is good. They're a good team, and they're desperate. So I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts. We'll wrap it up here in the next few minutes, but I just wanted to get that out there that Texas was the more physical team, and they were energized and they came ready to go. Not that Vanderbilt wasn't, but they didn't have the same sense of urgency that we're used to seeing from this team, like you said, Joey, in that Missouri game.
Yeah, and Billy, kind of piggybacking off of what you said in terms of the tournament conversation. I don't think that, because there's going to be fans obviously like, man, you've lost 3 straight. Vanderbilt hasn't looked great the last couple of games. You lose to a Texas team that currently is on the outside looking in, that a lot of people felt like we're going to have to win 2 or 3 games here at Nashville to get in. I will say this, not only do you have the bid stealers, there's not really a lot of them, but a team that is kind of comparable to Vanderbilt, West Virginia, 19-10. They went 10-10 in the Big 12, kind of comparable in terms of the resume. They just lost to Colorado, who was one of the last ranked teams in the Big 12. So that's another team similar to Vanderbilt that, if West Virginia wins that game, maybe you're a little bit more worried. But again, teams that are in the same position as Vanderbilt still could lose as well. So it's not just that Vanderbilt drops. There's going to have to be teams that pass them as well. In terms of Dayton, that's kind of a wait and see thing. It just depends on where the committee values what Vanderbilt has done to this point, and also, again, what some of those bid stealers look like. It's going to take a crazy ACC or Big East or Big Ten winner for Vanderbilt, I think, to not get in, and it's going to take more than one as well. Now, Dayton, that I feel like just depends on where this team is valued in terms of seeding. I think they're probably a 10 seed. You could argue maybe an 11, but also playing in a really strong SEC, I think, helps Vanderbilt's cause as well. So,
By the way,
again, maybe where some of the panic could come from, but this team should likely be in the field. I think it's just a matter of where, and if they do potentially have to play that extra game.
By the way, I don't think they'll be in Dayton. That's what my gut tells me.
Me too.
Joey, I don't know if you agree. I think you agree, Brandon. But Joey, I think this is either a 10 seed firmly in the field or an 11 seed just avoiding Dayton.
Yeah, I agree. I talked to Mitch Light, who's multi-time Vandy 24/7 podcast guest from
Yes.
The Athletic today, and he talked about the committee devalued the last 10 games for a reason. They used to have it in their selection process. They used to talk about who was trending the right way at the end of the season, and they pulled it because the analytics didn't back up that was a valuable point of data. And I think that's going to help Vanderbilt down the stretch here, that they aren't
Yep.
really worried about that. I don't think they're going to go to Dayton. I think it would take a number of bid stealers that really isn't super possible at this point. It'd have to be the ACC, somebody not named Duke, Louisville, Clemson winning it. It would have to take Boise State winning the Mountain West, which I don't necessarily see happening. It'd have to take the Big East being won by somebody who's not going to get in the tournament, by a Georgetown or not a Seton Hall with nobody that bad, but a team that's kind of in the middle of the pack. I think all of those things would have to happen for them to even have a thought of being out. Now, the
Because
variable
the bubble
here
is so soft.
yeah, and the variable here, Vanderbilt's non-conference strength of schedule is among the worst of any bubble team. That's
True.
going to hurt them, and we have to see how the committee's going to evaluate them for that. I think A&M got punished for that a few years ago. Wake Forest got punished for that. But also Vanderbilt has a good enough resume to where I don't think that matters a ton. I think the guys in the locker room kind of said it. I think A.J. Hogarth said it. Jalen Carey said it. They've done enough to where I don't think we should really be worried about them not getting in. I think Dayton would, if you get two bid stealers, I think Dayton maybe is a possibility. But right now they're not even in the next four out. So we'll see. But Philly, we'll send it to you. Or
Yep.
do you want to talk?
Yeah.
So I didn't know why you.
No,
I
you're
thought
no,
you were
you're
telling me to stop talking.
no, not at all.
Man, screw you, bro.
Wrap us up, Brandon.
Just kind of backing off of what you said, I think too that there's two mid-major conferences to watch too. The Atlantic 10 with VCU. If
Right.
VCU doesn't win that conference, say George Mason wins it. VCU's a team that's kind of on that bubble, and also UC San Diego, a team that a lot of people feel like should be in the field, but if they somehow
Yeah.
slip up in the Big West Final, the UC Irvine, that's two other teams that could potentially be there as well. So, like Joey mentioned, I think it's going to take a lot of things that aren't likely to happen to get in. I could never tell you to shut up talking. You know more than I do. But
No.
wanted to add that in as well.
Another thing too, the bid stealer in the MVC is not going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Drake already won the MVC. There's a couple other leagues last week that I think
Yeah.
were kind of taken off the board. The SoCon wasn't going to get two anyway, so it didn't matter that there was an upset there. I just think last week played well for them, and I don't think this week is going to go to complete crap for them either, Billy.
Yeah, and to wrap us up here, Sam says, hopefully the committee sends Joey somewhere with a Waffle House.
You've been here since mid-season, Sam. I like that. Sam
I
is
don't
a
think there's-
devoted listener.
I mean, sure, there's probably not a city that doesn't have a Waffle House within a 10-mile radius.
It's not a real city if it doesn't have a Waffle House within a 10-mile radius.
And you won't find Joey Dwyer in it. But no, appreciate all you guys hopping in here. Obviously, Vanderbilt falls to Texas 79-72 here at Bridgestone Arena. We'll have post-game interviews up. Joey and Brandon both got a chance to talk to some players after the game. We'll have the bind compressor up. Brandon will have a column up, so we'll have all kinds of coverage coming from Nashville the rest of the night, and really bracketology the next few days, guys. So there's going to be some potential bid stealers to watch and keep an eye on. But just relax, right? I know it could still be a stressful next few days, but I don't think either of us are, any of us are stressing that Vanderbilt may not make it. But Dayton could be a possibility. But we'll talk a lot more about that. Vandy falls to Texas in the SEC tournament, 79-72. For Brandon Bigsby, for Joey Dwyer, I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for tuning in and listening to another edition of Vandy 24/7 Live.